Good evening, Latchkey kids. Do you remember a time when the most horrifying thing you ever saw was the Amityville Horror, The Shining, or Friday the 13th after you got home from Blockbuster Video and put it in your VCR? Well, let me tell you a real horror story. Everybody pull up a chair, sit down here by the fire, grab a cup of coffee or some hot chocolate. I'm going to tell you a little story about a haunted house I lived in. So every day in my early 20s, I would come home from work down a dirt lane and I would pull up next to a stone farmhouse with 6 windows and a front door, and I would look up at the middle window on the top floor and I would be very scared to look at that window. Kind of like that scene in Amityville Horror. But had to go in. I lived there for 3 years. And when I would go in, oftentimes throughout the week, I would walk into the house and all the cabinet doors would be open in the kitchen, and all the doors in the house, if I closed them, they would be open, or vice versa. And oftentimes I would come home and after a long day at work, and I would go up to bed, and every night I wrestled with whatever noises were going on in the attic. And one particular night I came home and I was in the bathroom getting ready to go to bed, and I heard someone walking up the steps, and wasn't a whole lot I could do at 21, 22 years old, but come out in the hallway and see what was about to happen. And I did, and I saw a shadow in addition to the footsteps. Sounded like old man footsteps, boots on, walking up the steps. And as I kind of looked out around the corner, couldn't see anybody, but I could hear the footsteps coming up the stairway, and I kind of retreated back into the bathroom, figure out what I was going to do about this mess. And I watched an apparition, kind of shadowy kind of figure, walk across the hallway, and it veered off into the right into a room that was notoriously haunted by what I believe to be a child. We'll get into that later, but that was one of the first episodes I ever had in that house, and it only got worse from there. But as we Gen Xers will tell each other how badass we are, all the trips to the playground and turned around elbows and back teen and sugary candies and stuff, we grew up pretty badass, and we grew up with the ability to live in a haunted house, just like I did. And in that house, I had 2 dogs that lived with me, Toby and Jenny. And hold on a second, we gotta get a little coffee in here. Toby and Jenny weren't real happy with that house. They say that animals can sense these things. Well, they did, and I sensed it too. I saw it and heard it almost on a weekly basis for nearly 3 years. And one of the more disturbing events that I had there was in the basement. There was a lot of noise in the basement, and I went down and I was able to recreate it. There was an oil drum in the basement, and if you unlatched the door from the basement door, it had a lock on the inside and out. And if you unlatched it and you swung that door into the oil tank, it would make a horrifying thunk noise. Well, when you're upstairs, you would hear that noise. Still never was able to figure out what happened. Never was able to figure out what made that noise, but it reminds me of the time my brother slept over. He came home from college to visit me, and he heard that very same noise after I left for work about 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 in the morning. I used to work in a stone quarry. We'd start early. And I came home that night from work. The kitchen door was wide open. My brother was gone. His glasses was laying on the table. He was up and gone like the wind. But that was a reoccurring noise in the basement. The basement was a really creepy place. The dogs wouldn't go in the basement. They wouldn't have anything to do with it. As a matter of fact, they would walk as far around that kitchen area away from that door as possible. And when we would all go upstairs at night, me and the dogs, and when you're trying to get settled down for bed, Around 9, 10 o'clock or whatever. That's when the noises in the attic started. And in the attic was quite a party going on up there, oftentimes footsteps, and it used to sound like someone was taking a jar full of marbles and they would roll it back and forth across the floor, but a lot of walking. And I had an attitude, you know how we Gen Xers are, and I was ready to fight this thing. And I would oftentimes go up those steps and I would start bawling this thing out, wanting to fight this thing. And obviously never saw anything, but that same attic had a drawstring light up there that the only way to turn that light on was to pull the string. And oftentimes when I'd come home from work at night, that attic light would be on. Well, guess what? Then I got to schlepp up the steps, shut that light off. And to be quite honest, I was never scared enough to leave, but it was intimidating sometimes having to try to figure out what some of this stuff was. And I think the most horrifying thing that ever happened there, outside of that building, or outside of the house, was a summer kitchen. And one day I was out cutting the grass, and it was daytime. A lot of these events took place at night, but it was during the daytime, and I thought I saw a reflection of a bearded man in the window. And I decided, I was adventurous, you know how we were. It was a little different adventures, though, when we got older, sometimes in our 20s. Things changed a little bit. It wasn't the adventures that we were used to as children. But nonetheless, they were still adventures, and they still had to be done and handled and adapted to. But in that window, when I saw this, what I thought was a man, I thought, all right, we got to go in now, investigate, see what's up in there. I can't have somebody prowling around in the outbuildings. So I went in, and that particular door, it was an old place. It was built in the 1880s, I believe. And it turned out there was an Indian massacre not far from there, which I'm wondering to this day, close to 30 years later now, if that was part of the hauntings. But when I went in, that door had a hook and eye latch on it. You had to lift the door up, and over there was a little piece of wood to shut the door properly. You had to physically lift the door up and push it in. And so I went in. The door was still wide open. So there was 2 levels. I went in, cleared the first floor, went upstairs, cleared the second floor. No one was in there. But when I came back down to leave, that door had been closed and locked from the outside. So needless to say, there was somebody in there, or something was in there. And wasn't much I could do about it. I moved on my day, finished cutting the grass, and later on that same evening, or maybe it was that same week, I don't remember anymore, I had a friend come over. I used to do a lot of Civil War reenacting when I was younger, and I had a friend come over, and his wife was one of these psychic kind of people, seer, whatever. I don't really necessarily believe in a lot of that stuff, but she, when they first got there, their first time to the house, she immediately went to that summer kitchen and said, there's something evil in there. And I almost crapped a nugget when she said that, even though I wasn't scared enough to move out of my house. And I tried to ask her what she meant by that, and she said, I don't know, but there's a man in there, and he's evil. Okay, well, that fit the description of what I saw, a bearded man, so I don't know. But there was actual physical contact and physical activity being locked in that building. So we went in the house, and I was showing them the house, and we were touring the house, and she immediately went to the basement door, and she wouldn't go downstairs, scared to death. And she told me there's also something evil down there, and that's where the washer and dryer was, so I had to go down there once in a while. But I wasn't liking the sounds of all this, so I decided to keep going through the house, and we did. And then she made her way to the living room, and had comments about the light in there that would also come off and on its own. And she said there was someone in that corner, standing there all the time, that would turn that light off and on. She claimed she couldn't see him, but she could feel him. I don't know, never saw any apparitions over there, but I do know the light used to come off and on. So that's that. You know, what are you going to do about it? I tried to find scientific answers to all this stuff. There really weren't any. So we wandered upstairs, and as we're walking up the stairs, she was making comments about the man that walks up and down the stairway. I thought, wow, you know, we had that scenario already too, where I was in the bathroom and the guy walked up the steps. I saw the actual shadow walk, you know, across the hallway and into another room across the hallway. And she also went into that room. And in that room, I had set it up as like a kid's room. It's an old house. I had a lot of antiques and things like that. And in that room, it was set up for like a child. And there was toys on the floor that would oftentimes move. Building blocks with the letters. Remember all the blocks we used to play when we were kids? I had some in there, and those blocks would move. And I would move them a different way, and then I would purposely go in there when I would check, and they were moved again. So she specifically stated that a young girl had died in that room, and made sense, I guess, to some degree. The dogs wouldn't go in anywhere near that room as well. Even if I was home with them, they would sit in the hallway and just scream and bark and have a carry on like crazy. And that was okay though. You know, I still wasn't about to leave. You know, it's my house, so I'm going to stay there as long as I can. And that never had any scenarios in my actual bedroom, but the rest of the house we did. And well, I lived there alone. There was no we. And the one, actually no, the most horrifying thing wasn't the summer kitchen I got locked in. I was making pizza in the kitchen, and that actually had physical contact there. I was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, similar to this one, and I remember standing at the stove, and something pulled my hood hard enough where it almost knocked me off of balance. The dogs went wild, and they stood real close to me, but they were going wild, so they knew something was up. And I thought, you know, maybe the dog jumped up on me, got her foot caught in my hood, whatever. That wasn't the case. Something actually had physical contact in that kitchen when I was making my pizza. I was never a gourmet cook, so you know how it was back in the day. Frozen food and lots of leftover things and pizza, and hopefully mom sent some food home with you to eat so we didn't starve to death. But anyway, that was physical contact. I wasn't real happy about that. It actually pissed me off more than anything. But there wasn't much I could do about it. I couldn't get my hands on any of these things. So I ask you, what was more horrifying? Watching the movie, remember the kid in The Shining scratching at the window, the vampire stuff, Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger, Jaws, you know, any of those movies we grew up with, those horror movies, was that more horrifying than actually living through it? I would argue no, because I actually did it. Speaking of The Shining and the kid scratching at the window, I'll leave it with this story. There's more. If you want more, comment down below, and we'll do a second version of Chris's haunted house. And but the window, there was a night, I'll never forget it, and I will admit that night, that particular scenario, I was quite scared, to a point where I actually had to call my dad and say, "Oh, I don't know what to do here, Dad." And of course, my dad was an old Marine, you know, and he made me schlepp out the door outside to see. But what happened was, I was sitting in the living room. It was maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night. And if you remember that Shining video with the kid tapping at the window, well, something was tapping at my window. And that scared me quite a bit, actually. That was the one time I was actually, I don't want to say terrified, but as close to terrified as I have ever gotten. And so I schlepped outside and took my little flashlight. Remember the Maglite flashlight? So I had one, and didn't have anything else with me, but I took that outside to see what was out there, and of course there was nothing. And came back inside, sat back down, pulled the shades down, and next thing I knew, it was doing it at the next window. There was 4 windows in that living room, and mind you, it was an old stone farmhouse, so I did my best to explain some of these things away. And some things I could, a lot of things I couldn't. And the things I couldn't still haunt me to this day. which led me into a lifelong mindset of being interested in ghost stories. And this isn't it. This is just that house. I've seen plenty more than this. But if you want to hear more about that, then comment down below. Like, subscribe, share, and I'll tell you some more ghost stories. Why? Because I did it. I lived it. And one of the reasons I lived it is because I was Gen X. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Hope you enjoyed this, and I have more ghost stories to tell if you all want to hear them. Have a good night. Catch you on the next video.